Chapter 1. The Tether. Dear Little Hood, I wasn't old enough to go out looking for you before, but now I am. I remember the night when he took you, when the man in the dark robe and villainous metallic mask stood towering over you while Mom and I were in the kitchen. She tried to cover my eyes, even turned me to look out the window into the night sky, but I could still see you. I could see you looking back up at the sorcerer in awe. There was no fear in you. All you could see in him was certainty and direction. You didn't see what we saw. You went with him that night, and I tried to look for you, but everyone in the village believed you to be dead. They wouldn't let a young kid like me go out into the vast world to find you. But that was 10 years ago, and they can't stop me now. We had a funeral for you and everything, but I don't believe that you are gone. At least, I won't believe you're gone until I see it for certain. There was so much innocence and good in a person like you. It deserves to get another chance at life. But sometimes, I wonder if you escaped the sorcerer. I wonder if when you did, you got to spend the time traveling the world. I wonder if you got to follow the rivers, cross the mountains, experience the magic and vastness of the world beyond our cliffside village. I imagine that if you hadn't come home, it was because you got to see the rest of the lands. The word in the village right now is that there is a storm coming, a hurricane to be specific, but many do not believe it is one of nature. No, many believe it was cast as a spell of dark magic, and I believe them. There have been rumors going around of a figure walking in the forest of fall leaves and no sunlight. Some describe him as wearing a metallic mask and a dark robe, one made of fabric and essence of physical shadow. To me, it sounds like him, the one who took you. Some say he was in the village, some say he has a tower, but if he was in the forest, then I know where to look. Because if I find him, then perhaps I can find you. I'm going to leave tonight to look for you. Once everyone has fallen asleep, I'm going to sneak out and begin my journey to find you. And I will find you, because I believe you're alive. I believe you're out there. Little Hood, I will find you. Sincerely, Sibling. I didn't fall asleep with the rest of the household. I felt the fabric of the blankets over my orange t-shirt and white and gray plaid overshirt, and I just hoped no one would question why I didn't get changed for bed. I wore the green sash across my body, and as I lay there, waiting till I heard my little sister fall asleep, I gave it a bit of time after, hoping Mom had fallen asleep as well, before I slowly and quietly shifted the blankets off my clothes and lightly moved my body from the bed, carefully planting my socks on the floor. When I stood up and made my way from the bed to the door, I took one final look at my sister, who lay peacefully in her yellow sleeping bag and unicorn nightcap. I'm going to bring back your brother, I thought, turning back to the door and carefully turning the handle, trying to hold both the knob and rim tight to prevent it from squeaking. And then I left the bedroom. I knew Little Hood was far from here, but a part of me always felt like I could see him, walking down the hallway in front of me, leading me. I could imagine his yellow and black hoodie, and I wondered if he still wore it now. He probably didn't. It was probably too small, but that's how I pictured him. I moved carefully down the hall, passing Mom's bedroom quietly before making my way to the stairs. Then, descending the staircase and passing through the kitchen, I arrived at the front of the house, the dark of the night making it difficult to see exactly where I was stepping. But as I opened the door, I stepped outside into the cold night to begin my quest. As I made my way down the gravel path, I made sure to check my sash to ensure I didn't leave anything I need behind. But indeed, I had not forgotten the snacks. I even checked to make sure I still had the small pouch of almonds that were grown in Mom's garden. They used to be Hood's favorite, and he probably missed them on his long time away. I packed everything I need for a quest like this. My uncle had once been on a quest, and his was over 130 days of travel. But he stuck to the guidelines of Questum, and for quests longer than one day, you basically need to pack snacks, water, and the right kind of boots. I do believe I forgot about the last one, but my quest did only take about 40 days of travel to the forest, and I was already 4 minutes from the house, so there wasn't really any point in going back for my shoes. It took about 10 minutes for me to arrive at the village, and the scenery on my way was truly gorgeous. The stars above the ocean lit up the cliffside and reflected off the surprisingly rough water, giving the illusion that the sky was both above and below me. The grass was a beautiful, healthy green right up to the edge of the cliffside, and the gravel path was winding and unsymmetric. The scenery was grandiose, and the ocean was stretching along such a wide shoreline that it really displayed how much more of this continent I had yet to explore. As I arrived at the village, it was mostly empty streets, which was in my favor, as I wasn't really intending on being stopped by another cynic. They had my best interests at heart, of course. They just didn't want me to go on a dangerous wild goose chase, as they say. But I find that metaphor to be kind of no longer applicable, since we often have wild goose around the village all the time. They're honestly pretty easy to catch. I passed by the empty shops and stands, blacksmiths and taverns, their wooden beams and pale brown wood uniting the styles of many of the structures. It was a small village, and these people were a pretty close-knit group. Everyone worked together to keep the town running. But as I passed to the end of the village, I took one last look at the town before making my way back onto the narrow pathway along the side of the cliff. The journey was long, and as I walked for 40 days and slept for 40 nights, my snack pouch kept me going. My only complaint about the current state of my quest was that it was indeed a lot harder to walk cliffside gravel without shoes. Of course, the cliff progressively lowered as the journey continued, and by the end of the first 40 days, the cliff had lowered into a beach. The sand was soft against my socks, and as I walked along the beach, I could feel that I was getting close to something. I don't believe people had really been this way, since as I jumped over a driftwood log and crossed through the seaweed and sand, I eventually arrived at a rock. And beside the rock was something I hadn't expected to find so quickly. It was Little Hood's hoodie. I knelt down on the beach to pick it up, and while I couldn't believe my eyes, I knew this must mean I was going the right way. And there, on my right, past the shore, towards the mainland, was the forest. The forest of fall leaves that never fall. The forest with no gaps in the trees and no access to light. The forest where the sorcerer was last spotted. And according to this completely undisturbed piece of evidence, sitting on the beach for the last 10 years, I could tell that in that forest, something could show me what happened to Little Hood. Holding onto the hoodie, I began to run up the side of the beach, up the rocks and towards the forest. And as I approached the entrance of the forest, I began to feel something. Maybe I was just cold, but maybe it was something more. I could still see the beach behind me, but something felt off. Like I was doubting it was ever really there. Or like I was ever really there. But as I reached the first tree, I noticed a carving marked into it. At first, it looked like something had gone wild and just scratched it up. But as I attempted to pass beyond the tall forest wall, infinitely suspended dead leaves towering over me, I felt a sort of resistance. Trying as hard as I could to move forward into the forest, I pressed my foot down into the grass, trying to lean forward, trying to make any sort of movement. But the feeling was almost that of trying to scream in a dream where you can't. I couldn't move forwards. As I stumbled backwards, I fell back first into the grass, then stood back up to look at the carving on the tree again. And that's when I noticed. These were not random scratches at all, but rather letters. No, they weren't letters, they were words. No, they were full sentences. This was a poem, and above the poem read, "The No Glades Contract." I stood at the base of the tree for at least 4 minutes before deciding to try and read it. Even trying to break back into the forest, but it was no use. There was an enchantment on this forest, and I could feel its effects. I finally decided to read the poem on the tree. It read,
"In the forest where the fall leaves do not die, the lack of light shall drive the travelers into madness. The frauds will be unveiled, the certain will become lost, and all prior destinations will become irrelevant. As on leaves they are not the same, for they can never see themselves. To see in the dark, a mask was forged. Though corrupt are those who wear it. Those who are lost, they cause the most harm, out of the fear that they'll leave a mark."
and as I reached the bottom of the poem, I could make out what looked like a line. One more time I attempted to go through the forest before it hit me. I was meant to sign the tree to enter. I was meant to sign the contract. Chills went through my body as the realization struck. There was some magic in this world that, once used, you could never unuse. My cousin had once been on a quest that had left him with a curse that gave him a constant craving for ricotta cheese. Of course, his wife had said that he got the curse from a lone baboon in a swamp cottage. The curse sounds harmless enough, but he was allergic to dairy, so he died about a week after the quest. It was quite tragic, actually. My point being that agreeing to a random magical contract on the side of a tree can have little to no positive outcome. Magic does what it wants, and I certainly didn't want to give it permission to focus on me for a bit. But as I looked around and then back at the hoodie in my left arm, I realized I may have very little choice. There may not be another way around, but I had to try. And so I did. 3 days I spent traversing the exterior of the forest, following along the edge, trying to enter the forest, but at each entrance point, I felt the same feeling wash over me, a feeling of powerlessness that kept me from setting foot into the darkness of the forest. I hated the feeling. It felt unfair. It felt like I was given the illusion of choice. It felt like the illusion that I could just willpower my way through the edges of the forest, and it felt like if I signed that contract, I would be making a deal with the underworld. It felt like I had no other choice, and yet when I arrived back at the tree with the engraved contract, the choice to sign it still felt like the wrong one. I scavenged through my pouch for something to carve the tree with. My snacks were mostly soft foods, and I knew that there was likely a sharp rock on the beach that I could use, but my mind still seemed to feel off about the idea of the beach being behind me. It was like I didn't believe it. I eventually reached into my pouch to pull out a little bag of almonds I brought for Little Hood. Then, undoing the drawstring and letting one fall into my hand, I shoved the rest of the bag back into my pouch and knelt down in front of the trunk of the tree, placing my elbow on my knee. I pressed the tip of the almond into the bark of the tree, then, with some applied pressure, carved sibling over the line on the tree's bark. At first, I felt nothing. At first, it felt as though I had just used an almond to carve into a tree that was never really magic at all. But as I stood back up, sliding the almond into my pants pocket, I looked deep into the forest. I took one more glance at the beach, but not long after I quickly looked into the forest. There was no going back now. I felt like I was nudged just a few feet forwards, but really I think I just walked. Perhaps I was already under a certain trance. But as I stepped past the tree, it didn't feel impossible to walk anymore. Instead, I just kept going, and soon enough I was in the forest. I was in the forest with no glades. There was a moment between when I entered the forest and when I was in the forest, where I shut my eyes. Maybe it was voluntary, maybe it wasn't, but when I awoke, I looked around to see that I must have already walked for at least half an hour. It was a weird feeling, like my surroundings from before I entered the forest had no connection with my surroundings now, and as though I could not truly see the direction I had come from, or which way would lead me out. I felt like not knowing where I came from almost prevented me from having any sort of tether to myself from before I entered the forest, and that was truly frightening. I kind of stopped in my tracks, not turning around in case I was subconsciously going somewhere important, but I needed to figure out where I was. It was dark, very dark, and the surprising thing was that I was pretty confident it still had to be midday. I could still make out the general shapes and colors of the forest around me. The leaves on the ground were orange fall leaves, and so were the thick and fully covered layers of leaves in the trees above me. There was no sky visible, none whatsoever, and the only thing I could make out were the few trees within about 8 feet of me. Everything beyond that was pitch black and impossible to make out. My socks felt cold under the damp leaves of the ground, and I reached my arm out to feel for the tree next to me, trying to gain some sense of balance and direction. It took what I imagined to be 20 minutes for my eyes to get mostly used to the darkness. I was still unable to see most things, but the things close to me were a little clearer. I tried looking around for any hint of which way to walk, but I couldn't find one. Every direction looked the same, and every direction looked as though it were a dead end into darkness. So I picked a direction and carefully made my way through the trees, reaching one hand out for the trees to guide me, and carefully placing my feet, my other hand carrying my brother's hoodie. Chapter 2. The Ice Bucket. Dear sibling, it's weird out here in the forest, but I hope you get the message. I don't know how you would, though. Nothing seems to be able to leave. If I knew how to get out, I'd just head home, but it's impossibly dark, and I've been here for almost what feels like a month since I escaped the tower. I tried to make a fire with some sticks, but things don't really work that way here. It's almost as though hot is cold and cold is hot, so right now I'm warming up beside a metal bucket of ice water. I also think I found a glade in the forest. Well, not really, because when I reach high enough, I can still feel the tree leaves, so it's more like the illusion of a hole in the trees. Like the leaves are projecting the image of a purple skyline. It's very pretty and honestly a little comforting. It's almost like I set up a home base in this forest, but I know I can't stay here forever. So I'm going to have to move again soon. I'm here. I'm alive. Come and find me. Sincerely, Little Hood. Little Hood crouched in front of the bucket of ice water, shivering as he tried to get as much heat from it as he could. He rubbed with his hands the hoodie over his shoulders, but he could see the ice in the bucket begin to melt. He wanted to try something he was sure would bring back the ice in the water. But as he reached over the bucket with his palm, closing his eyes, he decided against it, closing his fist and standing up. The young child looked at his surroundings, having had drawn a small compass-like shape in the ground by the bucket. The purple illumination of the illusions projected by the leaves allowed Little Hood to kneel down by his drawings and reference the arrows. Some arrows pointed in different directions, each labeled with different words like unexplored, cave, unknown, and the one Little Hood needed most right now, river. Little Hood traced his finger along the marking in the dirt, then stood up and faced the direction he had drawn, grabbing a small glass he kept by a tree near his bucket and making his way towards the edge of the glade. The illusion of the purple glade was quite small, only extending a distance of 20 feet in either direction, but it was Little Hood's only reference point, and it had taken a good long while to even find a place that wasn't impossible to perceive. He first gave his eyes the necessary time to adjust, then, when he was ready, began to wander forwards, through the darkness of the forest, and away from his little camp. And as he entered past the trees towards the unknown horrors, he began to follow the path he remembered. He had memorized the exact steps. He had memorized the sounds and the bumps of the tree roots, the textures of the bark, and the patches of mud under the leaves on the ground. And after a while, he arrived at what sounded like the river he had been looking for. As Little Hood approached the river, they could feel themselves start to warm up. There was a comfort of the feeling of waves of heat passing over the surface of the rapids as the mist washed over the child's face. And the white noise of the rough and violent water was better than the soundproof silence in the rest of the forest. Little Hood placed himself by a small stone near the edge of the river. Then, kneeling down, Little Hood lightly lowered the glass into the river to fill it up. With their other hand, they began to reach to the river. Then, letting their hands sift through the moving water, he felt it catch a few ice cubes from the bottom of the river. They felt like warm pebbles, left there specifically to attract wandering travelers. As the young boy lifted his hand from the water, rolling the ice in his hands, he kept his eyes fixated on the warmth of the water as he dropped the cubes into the glass of river water. Setting the glass on the grass, Little Hood leaned towards the river. Then, almost like a bed calling for someone to sleep at the end of a long day, Little Hood felt the river call to him. It felt welcoming, tempting, to surround oneself in such warmth. The young boy was cold, and the freezing lake was so warm. He felt the mist across his face as he felt drawn to it, and as he began to lose his sense of thought, of concentration, he began to shift so his legs faced the entrance of the river. His hand tipped the glass and knocked it over, spilling the water and cubes onto the grass, but Little Hood didn't care. He could stay in the river. The icy river was warm, and it was right there. It was right there, and the warmth was everywhere. He dipped his legs further into the water, Then, setting his hands by the edge of the dirt and grass, he began to lower himself in. Slowly, as the water soaked his clothes, he felt the water pass over his waist. Not going much higher, the river did not pull him, not yet, and he sifted and walked through to the center of the river. He felt calm, that he had found a place that would take care of him, would keep him from the sorcerer who he'd spent so much time with in their tower. And so, Little Hood lowered himself down to the center of the river. He lowered himself so he was laying on his back, half of his face out of the river, and the back half of his body under. And as Little Hood relaxed into the warmth, he all of a sudden felt a chill over his body. All of a sudden, the ice beneath him no longer felt like heat, but rather like Little Hood had all the heat sucked from his body. He glanced at his body, then, as he saw his hands, he realized they were purple. One of them even looking as though it had been frozen solid. Little Hood felt his body shiver and trembled, and right as the shock of the cold water hit Little Hood's breath, the crash of the river hit behind him, and Little Hood was shocked out. Chapter 3. The Forest. Dear Little Hood, I must have been here for months. It must have been so long. I can remember my name, but I don't remember what it means. I must be walking in circles, but I can't tell. Every tree is the same. Every root and leaf looks like something I've passed before, and I don't know how to get out of this. Or even if I should. I want to find you. I really do, but I don't know where you are. I don't know what I'm looking for anymore. Even if I knew the directions, it wouldn't matter, because I don't know where I am. Little Hood, I am coming for you, but I might be later than I thought, because I need to find myself first. Sincerely, Sibling. I can't take it anymore. I try some days to look through my stash at something that links me back to the outside of the forest. I usually stare at the bag of almonds, but over time it starts to lose its meaning. It's no longer the bag of almonds from back home. It's the bag of almonds from my sash. I closed my eyes as one person and woke up as another, and I would give anything to just be able to see where I was going. I keep hoping that if I just walk around long enough, I'll bump into the sorcerer, or maybe the tower, or maybe Little Hood, or just anything that can tell me where to go, but I don't know how long I'm supposed to wait. Was the forest supposed to take a few days to traverse? Was it supposed to take months? Years? Was this the mission for the rest of my life? How do we even know if I'm going the right way? I've been here so long that it feels as though I've forgotten why I'm even here in the first place. I keep telling myself that it's for Little Hood. Every time before I fall asleep, I'll tell myself that I'm here for Little Hood. Maybe that's true, but maybe I just wanted a quest. Maybe I felt like I needed to prove myself, but I tell myself I'm here for Little Hood. Even though in the recent weeks that sentiment seems to mean less and less, other than just being a placeholder for the lack of reasons that I'm here. As much as I've been guessing when day and night start and end, I'm quite convinced that I've really just spent most of my time sleeping in here. I tell myself I've been awake for over 12 hours, but it's probably gotten a lot less since I've been here. And I'm betting that I've only really been awake for roughly 4 hours every day. I definitely should have packed shoes, but honestly, I don't really mind anymore. It actually helps me to feel the ground better. I've tried running in a straight line, but I usually end up tripping. And I've tried walking in a straight line for multiple days, and somehow I end up back where I started. Maybe this forest is just a loop, or maybe I've missed something in the contract. I keep thinking of the lines in the contract again and again. The lack of light shall drive the travelers into madness, and all prior destinations will become irrelevant, repeated in my head. If Little Hood was in here, then there had to be a way to find him, and there had to be a way out. All magic has a purpose, and I refuse to believe that I will gain nothing from signing this deal. If this forest was so insistent on keeping people out, it had to at least have something valuable inside. At least, that's what I chose to believe. But I certainly felt myself going mad, And I think part of my madness is knowing that I was going mad. I could feel this image of my past self start to slip away no matter how much I tried to grasp onto it. It was never there when I went to grab it. I couldn't figure out where to hold on to, and my past self was slowly fading into the abyss. The only hint I had to go off of on how to navigate this place was the line to see in the dark a mask was forged. But the line following it, though corrupt are those who wear it, was really not making me want to follow through on that hint. But perhaps that was the trick of this place. Put you in such a position of desperation and feeling of heedlessness that you resort to the wrong choice. And so with my sense of direction skewed and understanding of truly how far I should take this completely lost, I think I'm just going to keep looking around just a little longer, just a little longer, just a little longer. And what felt like days turned into weeks, and what felt like weeks turned into months, though it's very likely that this whole time my interpretation of days was way off. But on every one of those days, I thought about the line in the contract regarding the mask. I thought about whether or not I should pursue it, or how long I was willing to go before I just did it. And every day I looked into the darkness and thought, maybe Little Hood is just behind that shadow. And so every day I chose to keep looking. I don't know if that was the right call. I felt my foot catch in a dip of mud as I walked along the side of the tree. And as I made a sudden fall, I could feel my freezing cold and wet ankle scrape across the bark of the tree root. My knees landed in the cold, wet mud, and my hands landed on the bark of the neighboring tree, just enough to scrape the palms of my hands and have them both sting. This alone could have pushed me over the edge, but that wasn't what did it. No, what did it was my sash flying over my head and landing in front of me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when I got up, cursing in gnome tongue at the incredibly irritating pain that will stick with me for the next few days, I picked up my sash. I then felt the top of my pouch. It was open. Quickly, I reached inside to feel if anything was missing. My snacks were still there, good. My hydration was still there, also good. But that's when my heart sank. My bag of almonds wasn't there. I dropped down to the ground in a panic, scavenging my hands around the leaves and grass and mud to see if I could feel it. And after a while, I did find the bag. But the bag was empty. I felt the drawstring hang loose on the end of the bag, and the longer I felt around, the more I began to panic. It could be anywhere. There were layers of leaves. The almonds were so small, and I couldn't see a thing. I squinted at the ground, trying to make out anything that looked slightly out of place. It was impossible to see. They could have been right in front of me, or they could have flown out of the bag when I fell. I had no idea. And as the one thing keeping me even remotely sane in this forest, I couldn't bear the idea of them being gone. I was hoping that at any moment I would wake up and this would have all been a terrible dream. The idea that I could have just avoided a tiny hole in the ground and I would have avoided this scenario completely plagued my mind. They had to be here somewhere. I was going to find them, and this freak out would have all been for nothing. I was overreacting. It's only a bag of almonds. Why am I freaking out so much over a bag of almonds? But I had to find them. I had to find them. I wouldn't move from my spot in this forest until all the almonds were back in my bag. I tried to contain myself. I tried to reason with myself that it wasn't worth the time I was spending to find them, but I couldn't restrain myself this time. I could feel my breath becoming rapid. And if I couldn't see anything before, my now blurry and unfocused vision wasn't helping. It's like I was rushing now, focusing on everything at the same time, and having real focus on nothing at all. This wasn't working. I was getting nowhere, and I couldn't let my last tether die so quickly. I couldn't do it. I had to think of something that would throw all of this nightmare behind me and set me back on my usual course of being lost with at least one source of reassurance. This was a nightmare come to life, and I would take any way of getting out of this. I was going to climb a tree. That's it. I was gonna climb a tree, rip the leaves off the branches, hell, rip the branches from these stupid trees and clear a spot for the sun. One that would shine a light on the ground and help me find these almonds. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed light. I couldn't lose my one tether to reality. I limped up to the nearest tree, my ankles simultaneously cold, numb, and stinging from the cut. I was going to do it. I was going to go up there to the top of the tree. And so I gripped the tree where I could feel a small abnormality in the bark. Put one foot against the side of the tree, and I pulled myself up. But my hands still stung from the fall. And the second I pulled myself up, my hands lost their grip and slipped down the bark, slicing open my already stinging hands. I let out a cry, but as much as it was one of pain, it was more one of sadness and hopelessness. I laid back on the ground, staring up at the leaves, hands in immense pain, and I just laid there and cried. Chapter 3. The Copper. Dear sibling, when the sorcerer took me, I looked up to him, seeing someone who knew what they wanted, knew where they were going, and knew how to get there. They were powerful too, and it was honestly quite horrifying. But there was something that I could never forget about them, and that was his mask. There was an aura of darkness and evil around it, but there was also a sense of guidance. I reminded myself daily that his power came from evil, but being stuck here in the forest after escaping the tower made me realize that perhaps a little of that power may come in handy. Sincerely, Little Hood. Little Hood had never been so scared, and trying to find the surface of the water felt nearly impossible. He was alone, and he was struggling to breathe. His skin was shades of blue and purple, and he could feel himself trying hard to stop his teeth from grinding. Little Hood could just barely make out the edge of the river, and as he paddled and tried to place his feet down on any rocks he could find, he finally found the edge of the water. Little Hood pulled himself out, coughing and shivering, and as he reached solid ground, the little boy began to cry. All he wanted was to go home. All he wanted in this moment was to not be alone and have some sense of direction. And as Little Hood lifted his head from his hands to look around, he could see that the river was gone. Once again, Little Hood was lost in the middle of the forest with no idea where he was. He didn't move. He didn't want to get more lost than he already was. He couldn't understand what he could have done to deserve any of this. He hadn't done anything. But still, he was feeling horror and pain he had never felt before in his life. It was almost to the point of him not even knowing how to interpret these feelings. But Little Hood could put together one thing from them, and that was that it was bad. And that's when he saw it, a small shimmering light reflecting by a patch of stone in the distance. Little Hood looked behind him to see what exactly was reflecting off the rock, but he couldn't find anything. So, slowly, Little Hood made his way to the rock, getting up from his knees. When he reached the stone path, he could see what looked like chunks of reflective copper sticking out from the rock. And as he knelt down beside it, he felt something else. Something was drawing him in. Little Hood thought about the sorcerer, specifically the way he so easily maneuvered the forest when he first drew Little Hood to his tower. Little Hood felt hatred towards the sorcerer, the one he thought would be a guiding light and bring him on all these adventures was a liar. And lying was bad. The sorcerer was a bad man. But there was nothing Little Hood could do to stop him. He was too powerful, and Little Hood was small, young, and helpless. Little Hood stared at the rock again, poking it now with his fingers. Little Hood imagined himself going back to the tower, stronger than he was before. He imagined himself walking straight through this forest with ease. He imagined just getting up and all of a sudden having the confidence to go back to the tower and show the sorcerer how he truly felt. The sorcerer would fear him. The sorcerer would pay for everything he took from him. The sorcerer would get what he deserved. But as Little Hood once again reached his hand over the rock, palm facing down, he closed his eyes. He could feel it. He could feel something flow through him. He felt as though he could talk to the copper before him. But then, like the last time, he decided against it and closed his palm, opening his eyes. Little Hood had stopped crying, but when his shivering body looked around, he felt something by his left hand. It felt heavy, and as Little Hood gripped it under his palms, it felt like a wooden handle with a weighted metal end. He picked it up and brought it closer to his face so he could see its full shape, and as he observed it, he noticed he was holding a hammer. Then, as though by instinct, Little Hood flipped the hammer backwards and began to ram the back end into the rock, leveraging and ripping out the chunks of copper. Chapter 4. The Mask. Dear Little Hood, I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm going to find you. All I really want now is to get out of this forest. I think there's a way through, though, but no matter how many times I go through the idea in my head, it doesn't end well. There's no good ending to this if I go with my plan. I can feel it. But it's tempting, and as I slowly but surely lose my mind under these leaves, the comfort of the sun would be a reassuring feeling. But it would be a feeling of comfort mixed with resentment, and resentment that I can feel myself trying to bury. Dark magic surrounds my solution. I need to leave, but I need to look for you. And in the end, I will commit to neither. Perhaps that is the trick of this forest. Those who are lost, they cause the most harm, out of the fear that they'll leave a mark. Sincerely, Sibling. I truly thought about what the contract said. Maybe the risk would be worth it. I've been wandering for what feels like over a year, and as far as I know, I'll be wandering more. I think I need to forge a mask. If the sorcerer could enter this forest and leave at will, then that must have been how he did it. To see in the dark, a mask was forged, though corrupt are those who wear it. I thought over the second part many times, and as much as it concerns me, I don't think I have much of a choice. Perhaps I may be lost to myself after this, but if I can use it just long enough to find Little Hood and get out, it may be worth it. Maybe worth the risk. At least Little Hood may get a life. But I still had to forge it. At first I thought it would be hard to make. The materials for such an item of dark magic would be difficult to find. But it felt as though the forest wanted me to be given this choice. And so I continued to wander through the darkness of the forest. But this time I didn't quite feel lost. I mean, I did, but it was more like this time I was being shown another option. And I could at least be shown the way to another turn in the maze. I would say it was purely instinct leading me along, but I'd be lying if I didn't mention that I did hear voices. And they weren't just any voices, they were the voices of someone I knew. I began to pick up the pace, and what would usually be filled with a caution for tripping on the tree roots was suddenly replaced with a sense of confidence and drive. I knew where to run, I knew where the dips and the crevices and the holes were, all because the voice would tell me. And it helped me run until I arrived at what it wanted me to see. The surroundings were dark, but there was one thing that I could make out very clearly carved into the side of a tree. It appeared to be a mirror. And it was as though one of the trees had grown around its frame, the bark and roots engulfing the edges of the reflective glass. There wasn't much to make out other than my silhouette in the reflection. That was until I got closer. As I approached, I could see the image in the mirror begin to change. I could see the person whose voice I recognized. I could see them staring at me. At first I was confused, but as I watched the way they gestured to me, I could make out enough to know they wanted to make a trade with me. I didn't know what they meant when they made their first gesture, but as they gestured to the stone at my feet, I could tell they wanted me to give them something deep, something crucial to who I was in exchange for this mask. Of course, they'd give me the same thing in return, but it wouldn't feel right. I'd be living someone else's mistakes, someone else's power, someone else's beliefs, and they would be taking mine. And as I lowered down towards the ground, I felt with my hand the copper in the rocks. The mirror made me afraid. and not fear of the silhouette in it, but of what they planned to offer me in return for my sacrifice. As I felt around the base of the mirror, my hand eventually came across a wooden handle, and as I lifted it to my face, I could tell it was a hammer. I glanced up at the form staring at me from the reflective glass in the tree, and I looked back down towards the copper, hammer held tight in my hand. And in this moment, I began to understand the choice I was given, and I understood the trade I was making in forging this mask. I would trade my mistakes, my soul, for their own. And so I held my hammer tight in my hand, head of the hammer placed over the copper. It was now that I had to choose. Any point past this was just wasted time. It wasn't till at least 3 hours had passed that I arrived at a more open space in the forest. The leaves were still covering the sky, but I noticed something that I hadn't truly observed before. As I looked at the leaves, I could see that despite the fact that they were all held up in thick layers, they desperately wanted to fall. Not only were the leaves dead, but it seemed as though the branches and trees were dying as well, or at least trying to. It was as though they were on the verge of death, but weren't allowed to die. But as I observed as much as I could see, I waited there in the open. I knew he would show soon enough. And there he was, arriving from behind the darkness of the trees, was a figure in a dark cloak that ran from the bottom of his feet up to the top of his neck. And on his face sat a large, villainous, metallic mask. The sorcerer stood before me, large metallic staff in hand with a blue crystal-like structure at the tip. And he moved with such evil, such power, such hatred and fear slowly in my direction. I was ready to face him. Chapter 4. Little Hood. Dear sibling, I'm not afraid anymore. Sincerely, Little Hood. Little Hood felt confident after his return to the tower. There was, at a point, an ounce of fear of his new capabilities, but most of that was gone now. The forest was nothing to him, merely a relic of the past he chose to leave in its misery. It had done nothing good for him. Why should he let it control him again? He felt powerful, being able to see the shoreline once again, but things were tainted. Looking at the world now felt like looking at a world that was still somehow detached from him, but very much connected to who he had become. The sorcerer had gotten to see Little Hood one last time before Little Hood had finally proven himself to him. He was free, at least. That's what he chose to believe. Little Hood couldn't feel the ocean water under his fingertips, because the gloves kept his hands dry. His body was completely shaded from the sun, and his ability to see was something he had truly missed. At a point, Little Hood had questioned whether these feelings would last, but in the end, his exhausted and frightened corpse could live to dry in the underworld for all he cared. This was everything he had ever said he wanted, and now that he was so close to it, he never wanted to think of the why. He would not turn back now. He would not be lost again. Little Hood remembered the sorcerer's face, something he never thought he'd get to see, but perhaps the mask always breaks at one point or another. It was the one thing that plagued Little Hood's mind after his newfound confidence. The sight of the sorcerer's mask broke. He tried to forget that image, what it implied, but he couldn't. It was deteriorating, but there was also something comforting about being able to imagine the events that had just occurred. Perhaps he could prove his devotion and commitment to the gods above, and that would grant him the desire to continue on this path, the desire to love the end result. And for now, he would let his regrets live on the wayside. Perhaps he would bury them in this ocean in the hope his past doesn't wash back up to find him. He remembered the sorcerer on the floor of the tower, the way he crawled backwards on the floor and squirmed to get out of the way. He looked frightened, and it made Little Hood feel so powerful. He remembered the way the sorcerer's body shook as he hid curled into a ball in the corner of the tower. He remembered the way he tried to scream. He remembered the way the sorcerer stopped breathing. Chapter 5. The Cast. The sorcerer dug his staff into the dirt as he stepped out of the shadows, and I was there, waiting for him. His long black cloak was menacing, and his mask was exactly the one I had seen in the copper's potential. The one I could use to see in the dark of the forest. The one I didn't make. But as I looked at him, I could see not just an aura of malice and terror, but an aura of fear. He was afraid of something. He was afraid of me. No, he was afraid of what I might reveal. "Little Hood!" I yelled in his direction. "Take down your mask." There was a pause, one that felt like ages, but as the silence continued, I began to slowly walk towards him, holding out my hand. "Come home, brother. This mask, it's not you. We will find another way out." The sorcerer did not move from his place, but instead, he took the staff and moved it in front of his body, likely preparing to cast another spell. "Please, come home." I made my way closer to him, and while I knew he could end me in an instant, I also knew that he wouldn't. He wouldn't hurt me. "Cease fire on your dark magic. This isn't you." And then I arrived at him, my face up against his mask, body brushing against his menacing cloak. He was taller than me now. He had grown, and as I slowly moved my hand up towards his mask, I carefully cupped the back of it with my palm and pulled it from Little Hood's face. I dropped the mask onto the leaves, then looked at him. He had short black hair with a few scars along his skin, but he was so much older than I remember. He was crying, but I could see that he was trying to be stoic about it. I wrapped my arms around him, giving him a comforting hug, and as much as I was told that he would never be found, and as much as I refused to believe that sentiment, at a certain point, I had started to believe it myself. "Come home, brother," I said before stepping back to look at him. He stood there, and as he stared at me, I could tell there was an intense conflict in him. At first, I thought he would never speak, but then he did. "Join me," he said, one hand on the staff, other hand now reaching out towards me. "We could be this, together." He gestured towards his robes. I paused, then, taking a breath, I responded in a way I never thought I would. "I can't. You don't need this anymore. You can come home." But as I said that, another tear ran down Little Hood's face. "Imagine what we could do. Join me." I stepped back. I couldn't believe that I was, but I stepped back from Little Hood. "I can't." I could see the conflict build in his face. "Why not?" Little Hood slammed the staff into the ground, and I could feel the ground begin to shake in terror between me and Little Hood. Light blue waves of light leaving Little Hood's staff, and as soon as I was hit, I could feel my body starting to be pulled towards him. I leaned back as much as I could, digging my heels into the dirt and staring directly at him. It was working. I was resisting his pull, but it was a lot of force. My heels were ripping up dirt and grass. "I'm sorry," I said, slowly moving towards him as the spell dragged me along. "I can't. Maybe someday, but this isn't the Little Hood I know." I could see tears of frustration running down Little Hood's face. He was trying to keep me pulled. I could feel the strain. My legs grew tired, and I stood there, heels dug into the deep of the dirt. I would say I did something clever to escape, or finally convinced him to let go of his new form, but that's not how this stalemate came to an end. It never really did. Eventually, over the weeks, one of us just grew tired, and I escaped his pull. I don't know when I'll find the exit of the forest. I don't know how long I've been searching, but it hasn't gotten any easier. But eventually I will find it. I know I will. As for Little Hood, I don't know what he's doing now, but I cannot go where he goes. I cannot follow him as he rains destruction over the town and uses his dark magic for the forces of evil. But I don't believe he will do that forever. I see good in him, the same good that was there the day he was taken. I know it's there. I know it's fighting him now. perhaps I'll see him again, or perhaps I won't, but as I reached into my pants pocket, I felt something. It felt small, like an egg, but slightly larger than a pea, and more flat. Then, when I pulled it out, I realized immediately what it was. It was an almond. I had been carrying one this whole time, the one that I used to carve my signature into the contract. I took a moment and paused. Then, I kneeled on the ground by the roots of one of the dying forest trees. I carefully reached into my pouch for the empty bag of almonds, and, sticking the one remaining almond into the bag, I tied up the drawstring and sat the bag by the root of the trees. Then I got up and continued trying to find the exit of the forest with no blades, leaving the bag with a single almond by the roots for little Hood to find.